What's up, everyone? This is me, Dre. Now, in the light of everything that's happened in Isla Vista, California with Elliot Rodger, his whole killing spree and everything, I created a video expressing my point of view as far as how I saw things. I tried to do a lot of research as far as what's happened, what led up to that point, watch his videos, and I surmised that he was just a selfish little self-entitled bastard who believed that women should flock to him simply because of how he looked, whereas his lack of understanding as far as how he needs to be able to provide to a woman with not just his physical looks, but on the inside, a deeper woman is going to want a man who they can speak to or at least reach on an intellectual level. And that's the one thing that he didn't understand. In my video, I made my analysis, and because of some of the things that I said, people have responded, some definitely for, or at least agreeing to what I said, and a couple had not necessarily argued, but they just wanted to pinpoint a couple of things because we're talking about a privileged, a privileged young man, and as in most cases, by doing something like this, there was always some sort of mental instability or some sort of condition that was attributed to his act of violence. So in this case, they said it was Asperger's syndrome, which I think is total bullshit. He was accountable, and it was just brought to light that he had sent out a manifesto, which when I took a look at it, it was more of an autobiography, a journal, because it detailed from the age of 5. He talked about his birth and his parents at a young age giving birth to him, all the way up until the time that he ultimately killed himself. But this was an attractive young man, very articulate. When you read the manifesto, you see where he had very well put words together as far as the events of his life and how his troubles began with women and things like that. But he calculated these moves and planned everything about a year and a half in advance. So you can't blame that on Asperger's syndrome. This selfish little fuck knew exactly what he was going to do, and he knew that he didn't want to face the consequences if he were to be captured because of that. So he had mentioned that in the event that he gets cornered or anything to that effect, he was going to take a dose of drugs and alcohol, and if that doesn't kill him, he was at least going to turn his guns, because he had purchased firearms, powerful firearms at that, but he was going to turn the gun on himself to kill himself because he didn't want to get captured and go to jail, which I think is a bitch move. So he definitely had what I call bitch tendencies. And when you read this manifesto, bitch tendencies, it backs it up, because you see in a lot of instances where he's crying and crying and crying. And in most cases, it's because he felt like life was unfair. He would see couples, kids that were his age. He even mentioned Alpha Dogs, that movie with Justin Timberlake, and they were talking about this 15-year-old kid who was having sex. But it was a movie. It was just part of a script. Elliot had this idea, this fantasy world, to where women should flock to him simply because of his physical appearance. And I stated that earlier in this video, but what it all boils down to is he depended on his parents, and he even thought like a child. There were instances where you read where he had gone to Morocco because his stepmother and father felt like he needed to get away just to kind of take his mind off things, and maybe a change of scenery, a different environment for a short period of time would do him some good. And he had detailed about how he had gotten to Morocco, and by the time he got off the plane, he was just crying and crying. It really put off his stepmother's family, and then he had begged his mother to bring him back home, and she flew from California to Morocco, took him back. So this is someone who depended on his family, and as I stated in my video, had they kicked his ass, because he wouldn't have had that kind of behavior if he had stronger parents that would put the foot in his ass every time he would have these little fits and tantrums. And like I said, it may not be the remedy for every case, but I know in my household it definitely worked for us, and I believe it should have worked for him. Not to say that all rich people don't discipline their kids, but this little sorry bastard, he could have definitely used that. And then when you look at the videos, a little bit of borderline racism, because when he had moved into his apartment, when he started going to college, he had a couple of housemates who had a friend, a black friend, and when the discussion of whether they were virgins or not came about, the black guy said that he lost his virginity at the age of 13, and he lost it to a white girl. And he goes on to say that he was part of British aristocracy, whereas the black guy was a descendant of slaves. So that really fucked me up when I read that. But then he was talking about how this black filth can get a white girl. And then a little bit later, he's talking about how his father came to visit him from Santa Barbara, or drove up to Santa Barbara, and they went to lunch. And during that period, as he sat at the table, he looked down the way and he saw a dark-skinned Mexican guy with a blonde white girl, because he had this fixation with blonde white girls. So he got upset, talking about this Mexican filth getting with a white girl. And of course, he had some other issues with Hispanics, not really too much with black people. And he really kept it to himself, so he didn't rant on about how black people were this and Mexicans were this. He just felt like people were not as good as him. He was just a selfish little bastard, very entitled. But as far as with the planning of the killing, he specified many different things, which are pretty disturbing, because he even talked about killing his stepmother, who he disdained. And also, he had a younger brother from his stepmother that was going to have a more successful life, or at least his stepmother had got him into commercials. And she was talking about how by the time he's 22, he's going to be a successful actor. He's probably going to have lost his virginity. And Elliot felt like he couldn't allow his little brother to surpass him. So he even determined that he was going to kill his little brother along with his stepmother, as long as his father was away on some sort of business trip. And then, of course, he talked about, at the time, his two housemates, which are two Asian foreign exchange students, that he didn't get along with, didn't care much about, and he was going to kill them. It just so happened that he did stab them to death, along with a third person who was a friend of the housemates. And then, of course, he went to the sorority, and he detailed all this. So it was careful planning. So you can't blame this on Asperger's. And those who want to dispute this, there's only so much that you can do in terms of saying it's because of some sort of mental condition. Yes, he had a fixation with blonde white girls. And he even mentioned his desire for not necessarily a white girl, but I mean, obviously white girl because of the blonde hair, but blonde hair in particular. But he also had an inferiority complex, because every time he mentioned about some hunky jock type or surfer type guy, tall, muscular, that would just be able to sit down and have a conversation with girls, he was really put off by any guy that can strike up a conversation where he was so socially awkward that he couldn't even say hello to a girl. He would just think that a girl should look at him and feel like, hey, he's an attractive guy, let me go talk to him. Or because he has Giorgio Armani $300 glasses, or because he's driving a BMW. He was thinking that girls wanted a superficial man, and some girls do, but that's not always the case. But his war on women, his war on people that were happy, and just a constant talk about how people in their sex lives, he wanted to punish them. But this was all calculated, so I don't give a shit about this little fucking fact. I'm glad that he killed himself. Maybe it's harsh of me to say that, but as I stated, if it were my daughter that he killed, I want to kill the little fucker myself. But he took the time to do it himself because he was a little bitch. He didn't want to face the consequence and the punishment of going to jail, going through the whole court system. So yes, I think he had those bitch tendencies. I think he took the easy way out instead of facing those consequences. But this is the last video I'm going to make about it, because I don't want to sensationalize him. I did watch his videos. I don't find any intrigue with him, but this is the current event that's happening. I certainly encourage everyone to leave comments. And if you like this video, I hope that you like, subscribe, and share. Peace.